All right, guys, we've got a very special guest today. Before I introduce him, I'm just going to run through a few notes from the weekend, but also to acknowledge some milestones, as we always do. We've actually got a first Division 1 field umpire this week, Iggy Mariolis, who's been performing very well. We'll get a run in Div 1 in a 3-umpire system game, so well done, Iggy. We've got all field umpires this week, 50th game for Sal Somolinsky, can never say his last name, but well done, Sal. 100th game for Andre Kulpi, so well done, Andre. 200th game for Rob Midland, and a 300th game for Ronnie Murch. So there's some good milestones this week. Well done, all you guys. Thought I'd just point out a few things about wet weather footy. Some things that I thought about on the weekend when I was out there. We really don't want to change what we do from a normal game. So what's outlined on the interpretations video is what we expect in dry or wet weather. We really want those players to keep their feet. Obviously, that's not always going to be possible, but they do find themselves on the ground. We want them to knock it clear. If they choose to take possession, don't be kind to them just because it's wet. We need them to not take possession and cause a ball up. So if they do that, please play a hole in the ball unless there's multiple hands on the ball or the tackler pulls the ball in. Also notice on the weekend, and it's probably something that you need to keep in mind, kicking in danger tends to happen a bit more often in wet weather. Players not able to pick it up as they usually can. It's okay for them to kick it clear, but if the hands of an opposition player are nearer the footy, then we've got to remember player safety is a big issue and pay those hole in the ball decisions. Also sliding in, the contact below the knees, free kicks tend to happen a bit more in wet weather as well. So we just have to be aware that that's going to happen. One of the big things about wet weather footy is it's very congested. Players can get in the way of being able to see those obvious free kicks. So if, as a number 2 umpire, you see a high tackle or a player safety free kick, help your teammate out and pay the free kick. We don't want to pay the other type of free kicks overruling, but those important ones need to be paid and help each other out in that instance. And our last point was boundary umpires, especially some of these young guys we have, may find it difficult to throw the ball in with the wet weather. Just encourage them to come in a bit so it makes a better contest. I'm going to send out the regular reminder as I do about the determining impact for red cards. We had another umpire on the weekend grade it high when the player got up and played the rest of the game. So just remember, if the player does get up and play the rest of the game, it's determined as low impact. It'll be in the notes. You can remind yourself of that. But if you're in any doubt, give me a call after the game. The match review panel can upgrade the impact depending on if they think a potential to cause injury is appropriate. But that's not for us as umpires to do. So just stick to the guidelines on that one. After 30 years, I had my first player count on the weekend. So that was interesting. I'm going to send out a reminder of what needs to happen in the coaching notes. I think I did everything right, except for the fact that I got the game started before the goal umpires were able to get back to position. They were running about centre-half forward line, running back to goal, and I got the play started. And yeah, that was a bit amusing, but it was a new experience for me. And just for everyone, it's worth reminding yourselves what you need to do. Training this week, the goal umpires won't be present. They're off playing 10-pin bowling, but it's normal time and venue for field and boundaries. 2 weeks' time in a fortnight, we're going to have a special session. So we're not going to have a Zoom meeting. The SANFL are running a course called Tackle Your Feelings about mental health. It's going to be run especially for Adelaide Footy League umpires from 6 o'clock to 7:30 at Broadview Footy Club. I'd love to get a few along. So if you're keen to join us, I'd encourage you to do so. You just need to register from the link that I'll send in the coaching notes. So they're all the things I wanted to say. There's a bit to get through. I don't want to waste any more time because we do have a very special guest. I saw he joined. So Whipper, if you want to just unmute yourself. We've got a legend of Aussie rules football joining us tonight. I've always known him as Whipper. I'll have to find out why he's got that nickname. Before I run through his record and why he is such a legend, Darren, thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, happy to be here.
Hey, mate, any chance that you might be able to push the button so we can see you?
If I can work out what other app I've got running that's using my camera that I'm not sure what that is, I would. I'll get there. I think it's WebEx. So
all right.
Too many online applications that want to use my camera.
Okay, keep working on it because it would be good to see you. At the moment, we're just hearing from you. But while you're trying to work on that, let me run through your record. Actually, before we get onto your record, why is it you call Whipper? Where did that come from?
I think it was a combination of a couple of things. My massive build was one thing, so there's sort of a whippet, I think, was referred to a few times. And you may not remember, Cole, because I think I even started probably out at the sample before you did. That I was a pretty young fella running around, and I think it was Whipper Snapper that got moved down to Whipper. So, yeah, there was a few different, I suppose, connotations along the journey.
No worries. I thought that might be the case. So, I think you started probably the year before I did. I started out 93. I reckon you started in 92, something like that.
Yeah, about that time.
All right. So let me run through Whipper's history in footy. It is an amazing record. He was inducted into the South Australian Football Hall of Fame last year, and this is why. His umpiring record, he umpired 404 AFL games as a boundary umpire from 1992 to 2006. And that was a record at the time he retired. He also did 85 sample games as a boundary umpire from 91 to 2016. So, yeah, I may have started in 1992, I reckon. And, yeah, so he started in 1991. And the achievements that Whipper had in his time, he umpired 48 AFL finals. That's 14 more than the closest rival in VFL AFL history. He umpired 12 consecutive AFL grand finals from 1998 to 2009. He was the youngest ever AFL umpire at 17 years and 237 days. He also umpired 3 sample grand finals, 1992, 1993, 1997. All-Australian boundary umpire in 2007. The award was only introduced in 2005. He's an AFL Life member. He's the only boundary umpire to be in that illustrious group. He was the inaugural AFLW boundary umpires head coach 2017-2018. He started the job of the AFL head boundary umpires coach in 2019. It's a position he currently holds. So, mate, that's an amazing record, something you must be really proud of.
Yeah. Thanks when you put it all like that. Look, it's been a great journey to me. I've loved umpiring all the way through, obviously, to the point where obviously recently gone full time with the AFL, which is it's definitely been an area of passion for a very long time. I've loved it. I've learned a lot from it. From my early or late teens all the way through. So I'm sure, like many people that you guys have on your panel, it's a big part of life. I've also had a bit of luck along the way.
So while we couldn't see it on your screen, man, I thought Google a photo of you so people actually.
It's a much better photo. I have closed everything down except for Zoom. Otherwise, I'll lose that. So I'm not sure what app's running in the background. So apologies.
Okay, we'll keep that photo on the screen so people can know what you look like. So I know from very early on, you showed a lot of promise. You rose through the ranks really quickly, and there was a time fairly early on in your career that you walked away from the game. So just tell us about why you did that and I guess why you came back.
It's a very poignant conversation, Cole. Look, I had a fair bit of success early. And, my background in umpiring was my dad and my grandpa were both umpires. So it was in the genetics, it was in the bloodlines. And I started I was playing school footy on a Thursday and started umpiring on a Saturday, which was all around just earning a little bit of pocket money. And obviously it sort of escalated from there. But by the time I sort of gotten through the late stages of high school, I was actually in year 12 when I was appointed to my first AFL game. I've been pretty open about this, so I probably took it a little bit for granted. And when a lot of my mates were playing baseball in the summer, I was doing athletics and preparing for the next footy season. And I thought, I wouldn't mind trying this baseball game for a little while just to catch up with a few mates. And probably just took things a little bit too easy for a couple of years. It's fair to say that you can't mix the two sports. And it was probably a conversation with Frank McHugh. A lot of you might know Frank at a Golden Whistle dinner. I still umpired for a couple of years. I did get an injury in 1994 that sort of started unwinding a few things. In 1996, I still umpired SANFL League footy. And then Frank just had a bit of a quiet word to me at an awards ceremony and pretty much said to me, "What are you doing?" And from that point on, we knuckled down. And, pretty much it was one of those, I suppose, life growth lessons. And it was something that I never, ever took for granted again. And if anything, it added to the motivation to really go and succeed.
So while you rose through the ranks pretty quickly initially, once you made that decision to come back, you rose through the ranks incredibly quickly again, so much so you did your first AFL Grand Final in 1998, last Crows Premiership. Tell us about your first Grand Final. What was that like?
I don't use the word surreal very much, but it was absolutely surreal. So I got the phone call that I was doing the Grand Final on my birthday. And I'd done the prelim, obviously, the week before, and I wasn't expecting to get through the Grand Final. I was just really pumped to have gotten the prelim. It was my first year back on the list. And I knew I'd had a pretty good prelim, but I never thought that I'd be going through the following week. So a guy called Phil Sutton, who was the coach at the time, gave me a call and said, "Congratulations, Darren, you're appointed to your first AFL Grand Final." By that stage, this was Monday afternoon, and obviously the Crows were playing, so it became quite a logistical nightmare to get across. But we did manage to get across, and so basically the format for an AFL Grand Final is everyone gets to Melbourne for the umpiring panel on the Thursday morning. You have a training session on the MCG on the Thursday afternoon, followed by a presentation dinner. And then on the Friday, you go in the Grand Final parade, which was pretty amazing because it was Adelaide. There was...
Oh, might have dropped out. So hopefully Whippet does come back in and we actually get the camera working. I guess I've got a few questions to ask, and there's more to Whippet's story. Here we are. Oh, there you are, mate. You're back.
Yeah, I don't know where I cut out then.
All good. Continue.
Where did I cut out?
You were talking about the Friday of the Grand Final.
Grand Final parade.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the parade, because there were so many people from Adelaide there, it was a pretty amazing experience. I was sitting alongside another Victorian counterpart, and normally you drive through Collins Street in Melbourne, and no one knows who the boundary umpires were, but there was quite a few Adelaide people that gave me a little bit of additional advice, which was great. So we finished at the top of Collins Street then. I know it finishes at the MCG now, but that was a pretty cool experience. And then obviously the game itself, I'll admit, as I walked out onto the ground, well, actually probably before that, it was pretty exciting where the umpires change room is the main race for where the entertainment goes through. So Julie Anthony was the singer of the national anthem. We spoke to Mark Seymour, the lead singer of Hunters and Collectors, who's actually a pretty good runner too, by the way. So we were talking to him about running. But we also were in the presence of Muhammad Ali, which was, it was pretty, as I said, surreal. And then, walking out onto the ground, definitely shed a couple of tears of just couldn't believe I was actually there. So obviously that feeling of achieving the ultimate dream. And then, once the national anthem had finished and the hair on the back of the neck had stood up, it was switched on and straight into game mode. And the game itself was seemed to be over really quickly. Obviously, North got out to an early lead and had a pretty good lead at half time, although they didn't kick too well. And then clearly the Crows showed their extreme level of fitness and overran them in the last quarter. And that was pretty much the tale of the grand final.
So what was it about you and your performances that made you come through the ranks so quick? What were your strengths?
I didn't mind putting myself in the hurt locker. So back in those days, there was only, when I started anyway, there was only one boundary per side. So you had to be extremely fit. And that was one area that I really liked. That's what actually really attracted me to boundary umpiring in that regard as well. I didn't have the best throw, but I had a really consistent throw. But from a decision-making point, I was composed around the line. But probably the other thing was I thought that I read play really well. So I obviously learnt to cut corners, learnt to recognise patterns, and just understand where I need to be, and tried to obviously be there before I needed to be there was the goal. And that was probably an area that was a strength of mine. And for some weird reason, I had the ability to run backwards well too, which is obviously pretty handy.
So the game obviously changed a lot in your time. How did that affect boundary umpires from when you started to when you finished?
Yeah, so I was one of the only ones that did the 2 umpire, 3 umpire, and 4 umpire system from a boundary perspective. So yeah, look, clearly the game itself has gotten to a level where you couldn't have one on each side anymore. As soon as they stopped you had to wait for the flag after a behind was probably the tipping point where it almost got too difficult to have one boundary per side. So initially, you were probably more the 5-10K type athlete that could also throw a footy in. And that sort of morphed into nowadays the guys and girls that are umpiring at that level are probably more sort of the 400, 800 metre sort of specialists, so that bit more power based. But along with the additional, I suppose, repeat effort speed requirements, we've also really elevated in terms of the throw-ins. So the need to get that 18 to 20 and about the 8 to 10 metres high is definitely what the game wants. Even though the ruckmen stand in the car park half the time, we still obviously throw it to our spot. So probably, if I look back across the course of my career into where we are now from a boundary perspective, is we've got more sort of power-based athletes than what we did back then.
And 12 grand finals, AdFL grand finals, right? That's unbelievable. What was probably your favourite grand final? What was the one that really stood out to you in that time?
Ooh, I've had this question a couple of times, and look, obviously the first one was amazing. But probably the 2 that really stood out were the West Coast Sydney games, so 05 and 06, and particularly the 05 one, and not so much just because it was obviously the Sydney winning after such a long premiership drought, but just the intensity and the pressure that those games had were, they were, in terms of the grand finals I had a few blowouts, but they were definitely obviously some of the closest. So just from a concentration perspective and having to make sure that you executed, right to the very last siren was there's something pretty special about those games. And obviously, I wasn't too far away. I was on the other side, but seeing the Leo Barry mark at the end of the game was pretty special.
So what goes through your mind at that stage? Are you just so focused on doing what you have to do, or can you appreciate the significance of that moment when it happens?
I must admit I didn't appreciate the significance of the mark because I still didn't know how long there was left to go. But yeah, you're basically. I had a really hectic last quarter. That I was on the whole side by myself. We had at that stage we were running 3, and on the members' side you would change over halfway through a quarter. But I drew the short straw to finish that whole last quarter. And for whatever reason, the ball had followed me for basically the full 30 minutes. So I'd had a pretty busy quarter. So I was pretty fatigued. So I was very relieved to hear the siren. But I also had a couple of really close, tight decisions that I was just, I suppose, processing and thinking about and making sure that in my mind I had them right, because I didn't want them to come back and bite me on the arse if one team got up and it was as a result of a close decision.
So I'm going to ask you a couple other questions outside of footy. You retired when was it? What was the year that you went to? 2006 at the AFL level, and then you went and did a bit more sample. What made you want to retire initially? What was the thinking about retiring?
Yeah, so it was 2016. So
I beg your pardon.
That's all right. No, that's all right.
I copied and pasted it off the Sample Hall of Fame website, so they need to fix that.
Yeah, I'll get on to Chance about that. No,
yeah.
Look, it was pretty much the for me. You know, I said that at the start, my probably area of strength was the sort of the 5-10K type athlete, and you know, we'd morphed into the stage where it was more around the power athlete and the big throwers. You know, I'd also obviously had a reasonable crack at it over the journey, and I hadn't done a final for a couple of years. So I was probably looking at that point of, okay, well, what's really next for me in footy, and who really needs to take the mantle from here? And yeah, so it was about my last 3 years, to be honest, in footy were around trying to develop the next group of SA boundary umpires in particular to forge forward. And we had a pretty successful group with obviously Mark Thompson and Jonathan Creasy. Between the three of us, we had done quite a few grand finals, and you throw in Amin Shahadi as well in that group. He'd done multiple finals over a number of years. So we'd had a really good group, and I was probably, Amin had gone a couple of years before us, but I was probably the next one that was, in terms of, if you looked at age perspective, was to go. So it became about developing that next crop. And then, you know, pretty much once I announced that I was going to retire, I spoke to Adam Davis around, okay, well, how do I get involved in the talent programs and start to do some coaching?
Yeah, so before we talk about your coaching, one of your other things that you did was stair running, which got a bit of publicity when you went and won the Empire State Building stair climb in 2016. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure really where it started. It was at the time I was in the Fireys. So we'd obviously, we do a couple of drills where you put air sets on and the gear on and you charge upstairs. But I'd actually been on our honeymoon. Ailey and I went to New York. It's very handy having a wife that works for an airline. So we got over to New York for a honeymoon, which is great. And for those of you that may know, for those of you that don't know, if you want to ever go to the top of the Empire State Building, you go and you sort of wait at all these different levels where they change lifts so that you finally get up to the top. So we'd sort of got to the lobby and you wait for 40 minutes, then you go up to level 3 and you wait for another 40 minutes, then up to level 40, so on and so forth. Anyway, we got up to level 70 and there's another 16 levels. And they basically said, look, you can wait another hour here for the next lift or you can walk the stairs. So we walked the stairs, and as we were walking up the stairs, I sort of turned to Haley and said, oh, there's a race up here. I'd love to have a crack at that one day. Didn't do it for quite a while, but there was a race in Adelaide that used to be up, well, what's now called the RAA building. And I thought it was outside of footy season. I thought this is pretty good. I looked at it and they said it should take about 3 minutes to go from bottom to top. I thought, well, that's a pretty good little training session. Don't have to run down the stairs, so it's not going to be sore. So I did that and raced against a guy that came over here from Geelong, and he'd been to New York the year before. So I got talking to him and, picked his brain a little bit about what it would take and how you get there and so on and so forth. And then a month later, there was a race in Melbourne up the Eureka Tower, which is 88 floors. So it was a substantially longer race and obviously similar in length to the Empire State Building. And did that one and managed to get a placing in that one. And then thought, wow, I don't mind this. This is pretty good. You don't pull up sore. You feel pretty good the next day. So I'll keep doing this. And I put in for a ballot at that stage in the Empire State Building and managed to get an entry. And again, wife that worked for an airline, we got over there pretty cost effectively. Did the race, managed to come fourth. And yeah, from there, they pretty much put you into the elite category. So they invite you each year. And then, I went over a few times and was the bridesmaid a few times. And yeah, it was actually in 2016 that I managed to have a win.
So it was during your AFL career, you'd be going in off season to run it. Is that right?
Yeah. So it was basically the first week in February. So it's pretty much just after the Super Bowl. So a beautiful time of the year to be in New York, blizzard season. So he didn't mind running up a building, which was pretty good. But yeah, it would basically be, there wouldn't be that many differences between what I'd be doing from a training perspective for the stairs as opposed to getting ready for footy season. So it's about a 10-minute sort of effort up to the top of the Empire State Building. So it's sort of like doing a 3K effort. And there was a bit of correlation between the fitness and what it required to do both. So yeah, I was pretty much doing that.
And you mentioned it before, firefighter. Tell us how that started and why you were attracted to doing that.
I don't know. I think when I was a kid, I always wanted to be a fiery. So I joined the brigade in 06, right at the end of 06. I tried a couple of times and missed out a couple of times, but managed to get in. And I think the thing that attracted to me was obviously the chance to help people. I really liked working in a team in that sort of pressurized environment where you're obviously doing something physical. That was I suppose the attraction. It also complemented the fact that I could still do footy from that perspective too. There was a few people that I knew that were fireys and were balancing their two hats. So that side of it was really attractive. I'd spent 5 years on the trucks, and then I finished up in comms. So I was looking after the 000 call centre. So, yeah, it was a bit of a decision after a few, I suppose, realignment of purpose last year, and an opportunity presented with the AFL that, I just had to grab.
Yeah, so we'll get on to last year in a minute. There's so much to talk about, mate. Last week, you had your first week full-time in the role of boundary umpires coach, and you stepped away from the as firefighter just before that. So a big life change for you. How did that all come about to do AFL coaching full time?
Yeah, I've been doing the AFL men's list for basically since 2019. And juggling the two. So looking after I've got 43 umps and 9 coaches around Australia. So I'd been doing appointment selections, observing, processing all their performance measurement criteria, all that sort of stuff, and obviously online coaching for the last few years, which has been a massive learning curve, particularly obviously through the challenging times that we've all had. And I've just absolutely loved it. The role that I had at the Fireys started to become probably more and more full on. So it was pretty much in April, I went over and had a chat to Damien Farrell and said, look, I'm completely, my heart is in footy. I absolutely love footy, but at this stage, footy's not going to put food on the table. I'm going to have to just get us to the end of the year, and then you'll probably be looking for another coach. And he'd sort of, I think, seen the writing on the wall. And had done a little bit of background in terms of what we could potentially do with the role, add some things on to bump it out to full time. And he pretty much came back to me then and said, what if it looked like this? I absolutely wasn't expecting it. So we sort of did a little bit of reworking of the PD and a few other bits and pieces. And then it had to go through all the various channels to make sure that everyone was fine from signing off on it. And then, it came the decision point to look at ending a 17-year career and remaining with footy, which is, it's I suppose the only thing I can put it down to, and I'm sure you're going to ask me in a minute about something else, Cole, but it's for me, it came down to a statement, and it was actually Damien that I think articulated it perfectly for me. It's only the shit you love. And here we are.
Yeah, nice. No, very good. So you have a couple of sons. They are boundary umpires now, which must make you really proud. And for those that don't know, Archer and Chase have umpired with Adelaide Footy League, mainly in the women's competition. Archer's now moved on to SANFL. Tell us about how that makes you feel and seeing them progress through the boundary umpiring ranks in the early stages.
Yeah, it's been awesome. It's funny to go out there and I'm not sure whether they'd like to listen to any words of wisdom or not. But it's great to see them go out there but at the end of the day as well is to also to earn their own position in that. So obviously Archer did a few A1 games last year, but it's been picked up by the SANFL. and Chase has been doing some of the Division 1 women's games. And I just love seeing him out there. It reminds me of what it was like when I started. And I've seen some glimpses of talent out there that you think, it'd be great to see them track all the way through if that's what they choose to do. I get a real kick out of it. And I think that, I look back and know what umpiring has done for me. And I hope that some of the same things that, life lessons or opportunities get presented to them. So, I think it's a fantastic thing. And, I think that there's so much for them to learn by the people they meet, the experiences they have. So, it's been great.
So what would you say, not only to them, but any young umpire these days, whether it's boundary, field or goal, if they have ambitions and they want to, really follow in your footsteps and go towards AFL, what sort of advice would you give them?
Yeah, look, I think it's there's quite a few different, I think, areas that you can tap into at the moment. So, obviously there's the coaches that you have week in, week out, but I think you need to try and find a mentor that's going to give you a really, really good piece of feedback around how you're going, what you need to do, what you need to work on. And I know sometimes those resources are hard to get, but it's really about trying to probably source them out yourself. And I think the other piece is around, going to games, and instead of just going to games and watching the footy, is actually going and watching and trying to learn from the umpires that are there. That's something I think that's probably a bit underutilised. And I know, and I remember doing that when I'd go to the footy, I'd actually watch the footy. But if you actually sit and watch the umpires there, I think you're going to pick up a whole heap more. But outside of that, it really is about probably that self-efficacy and self-reflection piece, is looking at your games. There's so many more games that you can have vision of now. I don't think we ever really had that when I first started. So, you may not have an observer at the game, but I know at the SANFL level that all those games are recorded. So the umps should go and have a bit of a look at the vision and work out what they did or what they could have done better. So I think it's, a lot of it is about that self-reflective piece.
Yeah, great. And there's a time limit on these Zooms. It only gives me 40 minutes. I've got 4.5 minutes left to get to a pretty heavy topic that you went through, a huge life-changing experience last year where you found out you had cancer and you had to go through the treatment. What can you share about that experience with us?
Yeah, so I think I've been pretty open with the fact that I basically found that I'd had a bit of bloating in my lower abdomen for about a month. So when I say a month, it probably ended up being 2 months. And I just thought it was, I just needed to pass wind. I'd do a bit of training or do something in the morning and it seemed to subside a little bit. And then one Monday morning, it just seemed to be a little bit more and it was quite painful. And it was pretty much my wife that said, look, you need to go and get this checked out. I'd taken the day off work, so I went and got it checked out. And, the doc was really good. He said, it's not appendicitis. It's not this. He goes, I'm just going to send you for a CT scan just in case, just to rule anything out. Didn't think too much more of it. And, I hadn't been feeling fatigued. I hadn't noticed any other signs or symptoms of anything, untoward. And then, I got a phone call on the Tuesday to say I need to see you. And you've got a 8 centimetre by 5 by 4 centimetre tumour in your lower abdomen. They thought it was bowel cancer. I'd been booked in for surgery the next week. It was actually the surgeon was the doctor's mate. Went and saw him that afternoon, and he looked at the scan and said, "Yep, well, let's do this. We'll see you next Tuesday." And I mean that in the nicest possible way. And we'll cut this thing out. So I had the tumor removed. What they found when they opened me up though it was not in my bowel at all. It was actually basically attached to a bit of connective tissue, and they found out it's this very unusual biphasic synovial sarcoma, which no one had ever seen anywhere else outside of some adolescents in limb-based. And when they had found it there, they amputated. So in the end, they had a whole heap of experts get together and decide what this could or could not possibly be and what the most appropriate course of treatment further on would be. And for anyone that's been in that space, they basically just come back to you with there's this percentage of recurrency, and if it does come back, this is what is the likely outcome. These are your options. We probably lean towards this, but at the end of the day, what sort of person are you? Do you want to try and do something about it, or do you want to sit and wait and see what happens? So, yeah, so I booked in for 4 rounds of chemo and started chemo basically the Tuesday after the AFL Grand Final, and then finished just prior to Christmas. The way that it was described, it was a pretty brutal form of chemo. I lost my hair after the first treatment within 10 days. And that wasn't just the hair on my head, that was literally everything. But I was really lucky. I'd never had any nausea. It was just fatigue. But along that, I met just some amazing people that put a lot of things into perspective. And clearly, from my point of view, I had a lot of think time around, as I sort of said before, trying to juggle the 2 roles that I had at the time, all those sort of things. It just makes you do a bit of a deep dive into life. And work out where, some things that you may think are important aren't really that important, and where you need to, I suppose, invest in moving forward. So, yeah, it was, I don't know, it's as much as it was a pretty shitty time. I think that, I hope I've come out the other side as a better person. I'm definitely more aware and more understanding, and I'm just incredibly, I just admire some of the people who've gone through much harsher stuff than I have. And yeah, obviously from a perspective point of view, it's put a few things in perspective, and obviously with the new role with the AFL, it's I just feel very, very gracious and very fortunate.
Fantastic, mate. I'm going to have to wind up because it's about to cut out. Thank you so much for spending time sharing your story. If people had further questions to ask and want to have a chat with Whipper, you will see him at training every now and again with his with Chase, his younger son. So thanks again, Whipper, for spending the time with us today.
Thanks, Colin. Good luck for the rest of the year.
Cheers. Good on you guys. Look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Hope you enjoyed that chat as much as I did.
Go the power.